My name is Susie Pappas, and today is March 11th, 2019. I'm interviewing Leah Trosch at the Max M. Fisher Federation Building in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. This interview is being recorded as part of the Women in Leadership Oral History Project. Do you give permission to the Leonard and Simons Jewish Community Archives to publish, duplicate, or otherwise use this recording for educational purposes or for use as deemed appropriate by the archives?
Sure.
The Women's Philanthropy Department of the Jewish Federation has had several names throughout its history, including Women's Division, Women's Campaign and Education Department, but for the purposes of this interview, we will refer to it by its current name, Women's Philanthropy, but you may use whatever name you're comfortable with. Tell me your name and when and where you were born.
My name is Leah Trosch, and I was born in Detroit at Sinai Hospital, December 30th, 1961.
And where did you go to school?
For elementary school, I went to Hillel Day School, and middle school actually, and then Southfield High for high school.
So you grew up in Southfield?
I did. I lived in Southfield pretty much most of my young adult life.
So how was religion observed in your home as a
So
child?
in my home was conservative, and of course I got a conservative Jewish education at Hillel Day School, but my grandparents were Orthodox. They lived in Oak Park, and we actually prayed at the Lubavitcher Shul in Oak Park when I was a kid.
So you would have Shabbat dinners at your house?
It was interesting. We would go Saturday for lunch to my grandparents every Saturday. Mm-hmm. My Zaidi would come home from shul, and my Baba would cook a really nice Shabbos lunch, and we would have lunch there. And but my house where I grew up was kosher, mm-hmm. as well as my grandparents' house. And we celebrated all the holidays with my grandparents. A lot of times we would walk all the way from Southfield to Oak Park for services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it was a really long walk when you were a little kid.
It's interesting. Yet you would drive there on Saturdays for your Shabbat lunch?
Isn't that funny? Yeah, I never really thought about that.
That is kind of, but
you know why? Because when we went on Saturdays, we went to their apartment. When we went for services on the high holidays, we had to come to the shul, and we didn't want to drive up in our car. Even if we drove, the few times we drove, we parked several blocks away.
I understand.
Yeah.
So when you went to high school, were you involved in any Jewish activities, or when you were in college, were you involved in any Jewish organizations?
So what's interesting is I had a Hillel Day School education, but I really insisted on going to public school for high school because I really wanted to see what that was like. And my parents were not thrilled, but they agreed.
Well, where would you have gone to high school if you had gone to a Jewish high school?
I guess at the time they didn't, but my parents wanted me to go to Kingswood, of course, to Cranbrook.
Okay.
They wanted me to go to private
school. Okay.
So, but I think I wanted to see what the wider world was like. So I was not involved in BBYO. I did not go to Camp Tamarack. I really didn't do much extracurricularly that was Jewish. I started going to Hebrew school after school, the Hebrew high school that they had at the time, and that didn't last very long because all the classes were taught in English, and to me, if you were doing Jewish studies, you should have them in Hebrew, so I'm a Hebrew high school dropout. So, and actually in college, I was not involved at the Hillel House in college either, but once I had a kitchen and I was out of state, my house is where all the seders were. So I did do Jewish things, but not in an organized setting.
So would you say that philanthropy was important to your family when you were growing up? And if it was, how did you know that it was?
Okay, so my parents were involved philanthropically. They were not the kind of hands-on volunteer types. My mother was not like that. But they always were involved with the State of Israel bonds and Magen David Adom and all those fundraisers that were happening in Detroit. I remember my mom getting all dressed up, and they would always go to the big dinner, and my parents were always donors at those events.
Right. So what interested you in becoming involved in women's department?
I actually didn't make a conscious decision to get involved at the very beginning. What happened was my neighbor invited me to a house shower where they were collecting items to donate to new immigrants to Detroit for resettlement. I think there were still Russian immigrants coming at the time.
What year would you say that was?
You know what? That's a really good question. It was probably, I don't know, 1992, maybe 93, sometime in the early 90s. It was actually the person who lived across the street from me. And she invited me to her house one evening, and I remember I bought a colander, like a pasta strainer, whatever, and I brought that. And it was actually a women's department event, but I did not know it when I was invited. And once I went, I don't know, it somehow snowballed into other things.
So until that time, had you been contributing to Federation?
No.
No, not at all.
But I had been living out of state also for 10 years. So at that point, I had moved back to Detroit maybe a year or two prior.
Okay, so up until the early 90s, you were not even living here in the city.
Correct.
Okay. So when you first became aware of Women's Department, do you remember who the leaders were at the time? Who were the...
You know, it's really hard to remember. I don't remember, because when you first get invited to something and you don't even know that it's Women's Department or Women's Philanthropy, you know the person who invited you and the host, but you don't really know who the leadership is. I think the first kind of president I can remember, wow, I don't even know. It was probably Nancy Grosfeld. Do you know what year that was?
Well, I mean, if I could figure it out, but...
Yeah, that's probably the first person that I remember was a president.
So the first thing you did, you were probably back in the city a year or so, and you went to this Women's Department shower. So there must have been something about it that perked your interest.
I think it was getting involved again in the Jewish community, because I had been out of town for so long, and my friends' network kind of had dissipated, and it was a way to reconnect and become part of the community again.
So after that shower, were there other things that you started doing? Do you remember any activities that you were involved in those
I think
early
the first
years?
thing I remember was going to the Choices luncheon.
Okay.
That's what at that time those were the big event, 600-700 women or whatever at a Dutch alum. And those were the first campaign events that I remember going to. And all my friends and neighbors from that neighborhood all went, so we all went together.
So this was the program that they would bring in a speaker, and they would have table hostesses,
Correct.
which was a way of raising money, and there would be a minimum. So you're saying that your neighbors and your friends would make tables, and you remember
Correct.
that?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so let's skip a little bit, and let me ask you something. What did you initially do beyond going to Choices? Something that you became involved in, a committee or a chairmanship that brought you into Women's Department?
I don't really remember what the first committee chairmanship was. I just remember that it's your fault that I did it in a good way.
No, I'm going to tell you.
Is it true? Was there something before?
No, because I have to tell you, I was thinking about this
Yeah.
earlier. I came into leadership when Nancy Jacobson was the campaign chair.
Okay.
And I feel like I inherited you and Cheryl Margolis.
Right.
So it must have been before that, probably Nancy Grosfeld and Nancy Jacobson. Do you remember? Okay, when I first met you, I think you were doing either Give a Mitzvah, which was a program we used to have, or the that Tzedakah Fair.
I mean, I remember doing those. I just don't remember if that was the first thing I did. But I so distinctly remember when you called me and asked me to co-chair one of those, I don't know which one, and you said, oh, Cheryl said she would do it with you. And I thought, oh, God, if Cheryl said she'll do it, I'll do it too. And I think the story is This is sort of like an urban myth that you said the same thing to Cheryl. Oh, Leah said she would do it, and she said, okay. So that I remember
But we
that.
don't know if that's actually what
That's
happened,
why I
but
said
that's a
urban
great
myth.
urban myth, and it worked well because you two were very, very
Yeah.
good. But Leah, do you remember doing a Community Connections?
Oh, I absolutely did do Community Connections.
Okay, so we're going back
Yes.
now because the first Community Connections, which was called something else, started
Spring
in the
Forum.
early. Yes, it was called Spring. I'm
Yes.
glad that you remember.
Yes,
Okay.
of course I remember.
That was in the early 2000s,
Okay.
and I remember. This is your interview, but I'm talking now.
Right.
I remember that maybe you and Cheryl participated in that first one.
Yeah.
And then I think, did you chair it after that?
I did share it, yeah, of course I did. What's interesting about that is I remember I was on the board at a Dutch alum, and Sharon Hart asked me if I would do Spring Forum. She actually gave me a folder with information or something, and I did not have someone to pick my kids up from nursery. I still had children at nursery school at a Dutch alum, and it was like in the middle of the day. It was around
Yes, it
lunchtime,
was.
and that was pickup time, and I didn't have someone to pick them up for the 6-week commitment, and so I had to tell her no. And then a few years later, somebody asked me again, and I don't know if just because my kids were older and they didn't have to be picked up at that time, or maybe I had a more flexible carpool or whatever, at that point I was able to say yes.
So interesting, as a point of note, that first one that we did, we targeted, I think I was the vice president for that program, and we targeted young mothers that all went to Hillel. In those days, that's how we would pick a group, a demographic group, and it was the
Right.
Hillel group, and for that very first one.
Okay, that's
Okay.
interesting.
So then we go ahead and people noticed you, and after that, did you and Cheryl chair something together?
Yeah, I think we ended up chairing that program, that Communities, which is, I believe that was the program that the house shower was, that my neighbor had, and I think we co-chaired that together.
So funny that you should bring this up, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was when you first became involved in women's department, there was a much clearer definition between education programs and fundraising programs. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
And what do you remember as far as what called to you?
Well, I think both were happening for me at the same time because I was interested in co-chairing I enjoyed the experience of co-chairing an education program. And I was going to Choices, which was a campaign event, simultaneously. So even though they were separate areas, I was contributing it to both.
Well, hopefully everybody that was involved in education was also a contributor to Federation,
Yes, well, that
of course.
is hopefully. Yeah, it's not always
And
the case.
what I remember in those days is that we were very careful that there were certain people that, even if they did give to Federation, did not want to do fundraising, but they did want to be involved in education programs.
So I think the more I got involved in the education half of it, the more you learn, the more you understand that the campaign component is so vital. And it seemed like a very natural transition for me when somebody, and I don't even remember who, asked me to co-chair a campaign division or do whatever campaign work there was. I think at that point I felt I had made so many asks, like asking people to sit on a committee, asking people to co-chair, asking people to be the site manager at It's a Mitzvah, which was a role, asking people to go on a mission, whatever. There were so many asks that the addition of asking for money was, to me, not a big leap at all. I mean, it was sort of asking the same thing. Contributing is contributing, whether it's writing a check or volunteering your time.
So, did you, as you were doing this, see yourself as someday being a campaign chair and president?
Never. I was totally shocked when I was asked. Seriously. I know you don't believe me.
I do believe you.
I was like, really? I had no idea.
So I guess we should talk about we should talk about the mission.
Oh, that was wonderful, the mission.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, so you asked me to do something, and I don't remember what it was. And I said, you know, it's wonderful. I love planning luncheons and parties and designing invitations and doing all that, but I want to do something that's really important, something where my heart is, and that is Israel related.
Okay, funny that you should say that, because what happened in Sandy Schwartz was the president, I was the campaign chair. Sandy Schwartz wanted very much to do an education mission and really had a group of women that also wanted to go to Israel as an education mission.
I remember that.
And Marion Friedman was the exec and I was the campaign chair. And I remember we had conversations that we didn't believe that General Federation was going to support an education. And I felt as campaign chair, and I have to say that I basically was always on the campaign side, so campaign was my thing, that I wanted to do a campaign trip. And in the past we had something called Hadracha for women, but that had kind of dissipated, and I wanted to bring this in. So fast forward to this trip, which is going to be an education trip. And I did ask you and Lori Guerin.
So there was an attempt at, do you remember this? There was an attempt at a real education mission, which was just for learning prior to
That's the
our
one
mission.
I'm talking about.
I remember at the board meeting that Hadass Bernard got up there with an apple. Do you remember this? And she talked about the rosy glow of the apple and how this is the same rosy glow you have when you're in Israel.
I don't remember that, but I
totally
believe it.
remember that.
Okay.
And it just didn't come together.
This is the trip that I was talking about.
Right.
Okay.
And then subsequent to that, I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but then you asked
I did.
me to co-chair with Lori Guerin, and I was like totally on board. I mean, that for me is like hitting the sweet spot.
So, and in fact, you gave this trip its name.
Oh, I really forgot.
Okay, so tell us about that.
So I don't even know how it came about. Was it because we talked about going to see the Mona Lisa of the Galilee when
Well,
we were
I think
planning?
we had. I think you maybe brought a picture of this, and you said we have to see this mosaic, and then
Right,
fast
so the
forward.
mosaic is in our region.
Right,
The Mona
right,
Lisa of
right.
the Galilee. Maybe I brought it in because we were looking for images. So a lot of times when I was chairing programs, I brought a lot of the visuals in because I'm a visual person, right? I'm an architect, that's my background. So I was always bringing in images and working on the invitations and the graphics. It's just something I like to do. So I probably brought in the picture of the Mona Lisa of the Galilee looking for some kind of emblem or some kind of image to relate to the mission. And I don't know how it came up, but somebody said, maybe I said, I don't know, that it's a mosaic and about all the pieces fitting together to create a whole, and hence the name, the Mosaic Mission.
Mosaic mission.
Yeah.
And do you remember the qualifications or what went into somebody participating in? Because this was important.
So there was more of a commitment, not just about the campaign. It was a 3-year, $1,800. It was a pomegranate level gift. So it was a 3-year, $1,800 gift. And there was also a few other asks involved. They were supposed to speak to 4 or 5 friends of theirs when we returned from the trip to share their experience, not necessarily to solicit, but to share their experience, tell them about what they learned about Federation and about Israel. And I think there were some follow-up programs also that we did.
And weren't there some pre-programs as well?
Yeah, there were also pre-programs. Yes, I remember the packing program.
So
very popular.
This mission was very important because what followed?
Well, so many of first of all, I would say 98%, actually we looked at it. When I was campaign chair, We actually looked back at our Mosaic mission participants to see if they continued giving at that level. And I would say over 90% continued giving at that level for many, many years, even after the requirement was over.
And they became leaders in programs.
They absolutely became leaders. We plugged them in. They were co-chairs of committees, and they co-chaired the division, the pomegranate division, which was the $1,800 and up division. So a lot of them co-chaired that. And we did for a couple years, we did kind of reunion kind of things,
Yes, it was, I think it was a very...
It was great.
A real turning point in
Yeah.
women's department. Okay, so I have some more questions for you. What did your husband and your family think about your involvement in all this federation stuff?
So my husband is really great, and he's very supportive. First of all, I think at the beginning he had no idea what was going on. He didn't even pay attention. And then the more involved I got, he was absolutely always very supportive of whatever I do. And at one point, we co-chaired actually the Maimonides mission, which was the
remember
mission
that,
from
right.
for the doctors. And my husband is not really an involved kind of person, but they asked him to do it, and they asked me, it was couples, so they asked me to do it with him. And I really wanted him to do it because I wanted him to share in the experience that I was having and feeling the same kind of commitment to Federation. And because then the gift became from, we both gave a gift at that time, I just felt it was really important for him to do that. And my kids are always very supportive, and my youngest one, I think I wrote that in the questionnaire, he loved it whenever I would go to a meeting. He said, "Oh, you going to JFed?" He had this cute little name. I thought it was so cute.
So do you think it's important in a couple for both people to participate in Federation?
Yeah, absolutely.
And why do you think that a women's gift is important as opposed to just doing a family gift?
There's so many reasons, in my opinion, that it's almost gotten to the point that to ask the question why a women's gift seems to me like ridiculous. Like, why wouldn't there be a women's gift?
Well, tell us some of the reasons that you, because there will be people, and have been people,
Right.
that say to you, but we give as a family.
Okay, so for me personally, I don't think I would have gotten as involved, and I certainly would have not been asked to take on the level of responsibility and the level of commitment that I have in the organization if I were not giving a gift. I mean, I was just kind of hanging on to my husband's gift. Why would anybody ask me to sit on a board or co-chair a mission or do any of those things? So if you have hopes of getting involved and really getting your hands on things, I think you absolutely have to make your own gift. I mean, there's no question about it. And I think it's really important for women to have representation throughout the organization. If we want women to sit on the Federation board or on the Foundation board or to sit on all those committees that do the work of Federation, you have to be making your own gift. Otherwise, you're not going to be in a position to represent the community and represent yourself or your family. So I think it's really important for a woman to give
But
her
do you
own
think it's important for your family to know that you give your own gift?
It's so hard for me to imagine any, otherwise. So that's so hard for me to answer that question because I don't think my kids would ever think, well, why is mom giving her own gift? I think it's so natural.
Well,
I can't imagine it any other way. Let's put it that way.
Very good. Okay, so who are the people that were involved in women's department? Who were some of the leaders you remember, and who were your mentors, and why?
So, so many women for so many different reasons. So many women contribute different aspects to Federation and to women's philanthropy. So, I mean, it's great that there's so many different kinds of women involved. I think you were campaign chair when I was VP, is that correct? Or
I think so.
Or when you were president, maybe when you were campaign chair. So as a couple kind of campaign chair and president, under you and Sandy was really the point where I felt like I was really coming along and really part of women's philanthropy. So you guys were an incredible role model to me of how a president and a campaign chair work together. And it was a really interesting time because we had changed staff and you guys were kind of, right? It was when Marion started. Oh, that's when you became president.
Yeah. No. Marion and Sandy and I all came in
At the same time, right. So there was, it was a lot of things were changing in a really good way. It was a really exciting time and you guys, it was really flawless, so it was really great. And we have a great relationship, and you've always been such a role model to me, you and Norm. And
Thank you.
I just love it. No, seriously. I don't even have to ask a question if I want to know something. You tell me. And I love that. I love that you just say things so clearly. And I just so appreciate that because I learned so much from that.
Good.
And I really value your honesty. And you taught me a lot about being a donor. I mean, you were the person who said to me, if you're a leader, you make a leadership gift. And I will never forget that. I mean, that was, again, so clear, so straightforward, but it's the kind of thing you could put it on a sweatshirt or something because you really remember it. It's iconic. Other women, like Doreen. Doreen is one of those incredibly, so warm and loving. Everyone brings something different. And she's been on several missions with me, actually, because she came with us on a mosaic, on another mosaic, I don't even know. And she's just such a glue that brings people together in such a warm way. So she's an incredible role model, and she's so welcoming. I mean, I always felt so welcome around her. Marcy has been an incredible role model for me, too. When she speaks, I'm so moved by her, and she just handles a meeting flawlessly. It's really... it's a lot to live up to, but it's really, I learn a lot from it.
So, would you describe your, how you saw being campaign chair? Like, when you came in, how did you feel that you wanted to be a campaign chair? Did you feel that there were changes you wanted to make or things that you wanted to continue? Or what was your vision as being campaign chair?
So I loved being campaign chair. I really did. I mean, being president is wonderful too, and in a very different way, but I really loved campaign chair because it's all about goals and achieving those goals, and I just love that. I had a couple goals when I came in. Number one, I really wanted to simplify the campaign year because we ended up having so many different programs for all the different levels, and we have such limited financial resources. It was really hard to find the money to put on events and to draw, and then we put in all this effort, and you'd get maybe 50 gifts or something that I could sit down in one afternoon and make the phone calls and get them. Mm-hmm. So that was really important, was to simplify the campaign structure. There was a real effort to get younger, newer donors. That was really important. And I just felt the communication was a really important piece. We weren't really utilizing the different media to do things. And I tried, some of my things were kind of silly, but I don't mind that I did them because I think it was a worthwhile experience. I would send videos, or when we were trying to get people to come for telethons, I would send a personal note or a little poem or a little story or something like that. And that's actually something I learned from Marcy, who used to write these very personal newsletters that were always a story about something that was happening in her life. Now, of course, when she writes it, it's hysterically funny, and I'm not funny. But I thought, okay, that personal connection is really important in campaign because it's all about making that connection with another person and kind of getting them where they live. Mm-hmm. And so I really tried to do that. And I found that I would send, let's say, it would be like an email to 150 people that were on our board or whatever, asking them to come and make phone calls. And people really answered me, even if they couldn't make it. I think they felt like, oh, Leah's waiting to hear what I have to say. Even if they couldn't make it, they would send me the response with why they couldn't. And I just felt that personal connection really got people in the room and really made them work. And they were always showing up for telethons, not just for women's philanthropy, but also for general. You'd come to Super Sunday or some other push, and there'd be all these women, and everyone was like, wow, look at all these women that showed up. So that was something I really worked on.
So when you were in leadership, you were able to really use social media. Do you feel that social media became much more important when you were?
This is when it was really, everyone was trying, and some of the things failed. It's so interesting. We were at Epic the other night, and the same thing that happens at a women's campaign event was happening. That after they make the ask, it's very difficult to fill out the pledge cards, collect the envelopes. The room starts to get noisy. And my husband said, oh, everybody has a cell phone. Why aren't they doing it on the cell phone? And we tried that at a women's philanthropy campaign event when I was campaign chair. And it turned out it was expensive, and for some reason it didn't really work any better, which is interesting, but I felt it was important to try it. You know, even if we learned something, even if it wasn't to do it again, we learned maybe it wasn't worth the investment. So we tried a lot of things that, you know, like I said, some worked, some didn't, but I think they were worth trying.
So, do you want to talk about what you felt the difference between campaign chair and being president? What were your duties as president?
So I think being president is kind of more big picture than being campaign chair, because it's not, you know, about I got to get these dollars raised by this date and this event by this date. It's a little bit more about how everybody feels about women's philanthropy. It's about how women are represented in the community, and you know, it's just a different role. It's more about growing your leadership. You know, so it's very different than being campaign chair. I really enjoyed it, but it is a different kind of experience.
You know, a lot of people that were both campaign chair and president, if you were to poll the women, I think the majority would say they enjoyed their time as campaign chair more than being president.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of what you said, the
Right.
goals and the
Right, you have a sense of accomplishment when you finished your event and you've raised X amount of dollars and you've closed X number of cards. You're like, oh, did my job, did it well. Where being president is kind of more of a feeling. It's a little more difficult.
So let me zero in on something. When you look back at your time as campaign chair and president, what would you say are your proudest accomplishments?
I was really proud of getting a lot of younger women. It's so interesting because these are so many of the things that were so important to you, and I've noticed that. Yes, yeah. Getting younger, newer women involved, I think, is of course really important. And we have a lot of younger women right now that are leading and moving up in leadership roles, and that's really exciting. Another thing that was really important to me was making women's philanthropy accessible to working women. More and more of our women are working, and you know, the fact that board meetings were in the morning, it was just terrible. No, how can you make, you know, you're putting up all these barriers for working women, and that really bothered me. So we moved all our board meetings to lunchtime, and we provide a little lunch. So you can come in, you know, grab your lunch, have your meeting, go back to work. We had this past year, was it this year or 2 years ago, we had our first vice presidents that are working women. And that was a huge achievement, in my opinion, because they are also on the executive committee. I mean, these are important leaders, and you know, it may be that we will have an associate campaign chair or a president that is a working woman, and that's a really, it's kind of an overwhelming goal, but you know, maybe that should be there also. There should not be anything that a working woman can't do. We also got a lot of women on the Federation board because we have so many very competent, high-profile women coming up in women's philanthropy. We're able, like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 new women on the Federation board just in the last year or two. So that's been a huge accomplishment too. You know, there's some little things. You know, we modified the bylaws, we changed our newsletter. Some of those little things.
Those are all good.
But you know, they're all good. It's all good.
So what skills do you think are important to make a good leader?
I think you have to be really passionate about what you're doing. That's number one, because if you're passionate about it and you can communicate that, then everybody else can be passionate about it. So that's, I think, the number one. I think the number two thing is to be a really good listener. It's really important to listen to what people want, what people like, what people don't like. People want to be heard. And if they feel like you're listening to them and then you actually do something and they can see, oh my God, she really listened to what I was saying. She really understands what's difficult for me, what I'm really interested in, where I really want to go with this, then they really feel valued in the organization.
So we didn't get to this, but I'm going to ask you this now. What staff members did you work with, and what was your relationship with them?
So I worked with so many. Like now when I think about it, there's probably people that went in and out that I can't even remember their names because there were so many.
But the ones that you really
So the ones I really worked close with. When I
right.
first came into a leadership role at Women's Philanthropy, Jennifer Levine was the director. Is that not true? No, Jennifer Noparstak, that's right. It goes that far back. Right. So I worked with both Jennifers. It was first Jennifer Noparstak and then Jennifer Levine.
Okay.
I think when I was associate campaign chair, Jennifer Levine was in charge. And then of course, Amy started when I became campaign chair. I think that's right.
Oh, that was an interesting time.
So that was a lot. I mean, it was all new for her, and all of a sudden, it was all there in front of me, and it was
So
really.
you really had to teach her the way.
Okay, I would never say it that way because Amy is such a good professional, and she knows so much about running a nonprofit and working with lay leaders that she taught me all that stuff, and I taught her all well, this is the way Women's Philanthropy has done it, or this is the way blah, blah, blah. So it was a real partnership, and it's been great. She was wonderful to work with.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And what about, did you work with Jessica Goodwin?
Yeah, Jessica's wonderful. She's terrific. And we had a lot of people were involved. Marianne Bloomberg has been working for a long time with me, and Jessica, and for a while Megan was involved. I mean, there were so many people that make it
There's a lot
happen. A lot of support.
cogs
a lot of support.
Yeah. So how were you affected by this transition in staff and also in lay leadership? Like, how did you view all the different changes?
Well, I mean, change happens all the time, right? So it's both a little scary and a little exciting because there's a lot of opportunity that comes with change. So that's one thing. It's another one of the things about being a leader, I think, is you can't get too stuck in your own ways, because if you do, then you're just going to be fighting those winds of change, and then nothing's going to get accomplished. So I think it's really important to be flexible, and when you have really accomplished staff, even if they don't know every detail about women's philanthropy, it doesn't really matter because they really know how to do things, and if you work together, things just keep moving along.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of things, a lot of issues and things that happened while you were president and campaign chair, but is there anything else that you want to say about women's philanthropy or your time here? And of course, you're still involved, although you are now a grandma, so you're going to be busy with that too.
So it's funny because now, as immediate past president, I chair the nominating committee.
Oh, that's right.
And I didn't realize it was 2 years. I thought it was just this year. But I just found out it's one more year after that. So even though I thought I was finished, I still have another year. But no, I've loved my time being involved, and I don't see it at an end. I just see my role differently,
Okay.
right? So, you know, and when you're part of Federation, there's 1,000 different places where you can be of value, and I'm happy to be in any of them. So,
Well, we've been very fortunate to have you.
thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Susie.